Today is February 3rd, 2023. My name is Donna Rich Stewart, and I'm with the Conejo Valley, California chapter of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. It's my honor and pleasure to interview Mr. Claude Langdon Davis, known as Sandy, on behalf of the DAR for the Veterans History Project with the Library of Congress. The interview is being recorded today by Mr. K. Edward Lynch of Advanta Videography and contains reflections and memories of the veteran during his service with the United States Army. This is Sandy's story. Good morning, Sandy.
Good morning.
Thank you for contributing to this Library of Congress program to record the first-hand accounts of your experiences in the U.S. military. You were born in Casper, Wyoming, October 22nd, 1947. To Charles Langdon Davis and Mary Lee Noland, who was from Newcastle, Wyoming. Your parents met when your father was stationed at the nearby Air Force Base. You have a brother, Charles, and a sister, Jan. Interestingly, your family believes that your mother is descended from John Hart of New Jersey, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. The GI Bill allowed your family to relocate and buy their first home in Ojai, California in 1951-52. In school, you excelled at math and science and graduated from Nordhoff High School in 1966, one semester early, entering Ventura College. Would you like to pick up your story from there and tell us why you decided to enlist in the military?
Well, it was in the middle of the draft, the build-up for Vietnam, 65, 66, so all of us were always talking about it. What are we going to do? A number of my buddies were trying to get into the Air Force or the Navy, but the waiting lists were really long. And so that wasn't going to happen. So one day when we were surfing, we were standing around talking about the draft, and we decided to go to the Army Recruiter in Ventura. And we walked in our bathing suits, and he says, "Oh, you guys want to go in the Army?" And so we sat down, and I said I wanted to go to a school that would teach me electronics. And he says, "Well, we can do that. And you can do the buddy system." That was very popular, but the three of us did not do that. And he said you had to pass the test in L.A. I had to be able to get through the physical and the test. And he says that you had to do well on the test to get into this school. And so we went down, did that, went through all the testing, the physicals, everything, and then we were at the checkup thing, and they were looking through all my records and everything. And they concluded that I was underweight. Now, I don't know how many people in 1966 wish they were underweight to get the 1Y on their draft card. But at the end of the day, they let me in. And it was because I was joining, and I was going into MOS that didn't require infantry or any of that type of stuff. It was electronics, high-tech stuff for the day. So that is how I joined the Army. I joined. And then when we went from there to Fort Polk, Louisiana, there were 12 of us that flew out in the same flight from LA. And the reason why we went to Fort Polk instead of Fort Ord was because all our schools were on the eastern seaboard. And so they sent us there. And this was the premier infantry training base for the Army in 1966. I mean, if you were at Fort Polk, you were going one place and one place only, and that was Vietnam. And so they had the basic training, 12 weeks, that's what I had, and then they had the advanced infantry training school there, plus jungle training and a whole other areas for combat infantry. But we were just there for basic training. And so the 12 of us were RAs. We joined the service, And pretty much everybody else was either drafty. I think there were some RAs in the infantry guys, but generally they were just all draftees, mainly from Texas, Louisiana, that general area there. So they stuck us in the upstairs of the barracks, way in the back, because we were kind of not segregated really. It was just, we were different from everybody else. So went through basic training. I actually enjoyed it. I grew up in Ojai, camping, hiking. Me and a buddy who used to hike up the backside of Mount Whitney. So I was used to, being on the ground, sleeping on the ground, being outside, around firearms, all that stuff. So really basic training wasn't too much of a stretch from what I'd experienced in high school. A couple things that did get to me was the gas chamber. And we had to go in there. We did, the day I went through was, we had to do chlorine gas and tear gas. And then the tear gas part of it, we had to take our gas mask off and we had to breathe the tear gas, which immediately just made me throw up. But then we went in and did the chlorine, and they brought us in like a couple guys at a time just because we could actually get injured or die here. So we took off the mask, cleared it, and did that, and that was it. That was probably the only thing that I really did not care for. I liked the confidence course. I did well at that stuff, even for my scrawny little size. And basic training was not that big a deal for me. So I left there, and then I went to Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. And this was the Army's munition and missile school. Plus, it was the home of Marshall Space Flight Center. And they were developing and testing the Saturn V rocket there. So we would be in our classes, and they would do an engine run test, have to stop, go mill around smartly, as they say in the military. And then when the engine run would complete, and we would go back to class. And so I did that for 32 weeks, had 12 weeks of basic electronics. And because I was good at math and all that, doing it, you had to know a little simple algebra, a little bit of trigonometry, because that's what you needed to do basic electronics, so it was not a problem. And pretty much everybody in our class had some college education. I had a little bit. I had calculus, whatnot. And so, it was pretty easy for me, and I did good in it. And so the 12 of us, there was again 12 of us in this class. We had three people that had re-upped, and they got into this school, and so we did that for 32 weeks. In the middle of the school, they came through, and they were always asking for people to go to OCS, because we were really good OCS candidates. And one of them, they asked if anybody wanted to become helicopter pilots. So me and another guy from Chicago, we volunteered. But again, I was underweight, and they wouldn't allow me to go to helicopter school at Fort Rucker, and then the other guy had bad eyesight. So that was the end of that. Continued our school, and then we graduated. And on graduation, all but 3 of us got assigned somewhere, but me and 2 other guys did not get assigned. They put us in headquarters company, and we ended up teaching people that could not read well. And so we did that for a while, just teaching. And this was for the people that were going through the munition school, what we called ammo humpers. And a lot of these guys were from the deep south, couldn't read, and or had limited reading ability. And so we were there to help them out, and then did that. I can't remember how long we did that for, but then one day we got sent up to, got orders to go to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. And the reason why I left, I was going to be teaching, the three of us are going to be teaching, become Army instructors to teach armament systems for Huey and Cobra helicopters. Totally out of our MOS. You know, we didn't know anything. And their attitude was that, well, you guys that have some college, all that, you should be able to figure this out. And we did. It was pretty simple for us at the end. But we went to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, the three of us. Went through the Army's instructor training school, which was 2 weeks. And started teaching this course. And it really, you know, I really actually enjoyed teaching. At first I thought I would not, you know, care to be doing this, but then after I got into it and kind of got over things, you know, it was great. I actually enjoyed it. So we did that for about a year and a half, and there I met a number of people that I changed my whole outlook on things. When I first got there, there was a guy that transferred in from Vietnam, who was a staff sergeant, E6. Had, you know, combat, was a door gunner and all that. And his MOS was what we were teaching. And he was from San Diego. And of course, that made the connection. And he was he joined the rifle team. Our sergeant, who was in charge of our group, was the leader of the rifle team for Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And so tried to convince me, and it took a while, but then I finally said, okay, I'll go on the rifle team. And so his name was Mike, and so we would travel all over the eastern seaboard shooting competition rifle. We shot 22s, and we had match grade M14s from I forget the name of it, Rock Island Arsenal on the Mississippi River. So we traveled. I really enjoyed that. It took a while for me to get used to it, but I became a very excellent shooter. It was not good in what we call the offhand positions, where you had to hold the rifle up, but in the prone and sitting positions and kneeling positions, I was very good. So we traveled and we shot 22s, mainly indoor, traveled all over. Like one of the rifle matches we shot was in the middle of February in Littleton, New Hampshire on the Canadian border. So we drove all the way up there, shot the rifle match, and in the morning that we were leaving, it was -9 degrees. I could look at a bank and see the thermometer up there. And so we drove home, had a major snowstorm come through, and it took us almost 2 days to drive from New Hampshire back to Maryland. And people were dying on the freeways in New York City and stuff like that. So I enjoyed it. We went all over, went to Virginia, North Carolina, various places along the eastern seaboard. And we've shot, at the end of '68, we shot the commander's matches at Fort Meade, Maryland. And this was a big event where all the rifle teams would come together and have a big competition. And some of the guys that were really, really good at, you know, shooting, they could eventually maybe get into the Olympics. They would transition up and go to Colorado and become part of the U.S. Olympic team. A lot of people on the Olympic team are military shooters. So I wasn't that good. So I enjoyed it. And then there was a guy, when I first got onto the rifle team, he transferred in from Vietnam, but he didn't work in our area. He worked somewhere else on the base, but he was on the rifle team. And he was a little bit bigger than me. He was hardcore combat. And so when we traveled on the rifle team, sometimes we'd, share motel rooms to cut down on the cost and all that. So we shot a match. We were getting ready to take a shower and all that. And I looked up at him. He had his back towards me, and his whole back was just scarred. And I go, wow. And his name was Galloway, Sergeant Galloway. And I go, what happened to you? And he says, I was shot. And I looked at that back, and it was just like, just this massive scar. It didn't really look all that bad. And I said, can I touch it? And he says, sure, go ahead. And I was up there kind of touching, the scars, and it was just fascinating me. And I asked him a question, and I said, did it hurt? And he says, no. He said, I just was walking along, and the next thing I know, I was in the hospital in the Philippines. He said, where it hurt was getting through the recovery, and he said, I cussed at that nurse. I swore I was going to kill her, and on, but it was great. He got through it and all that. And he helped me a lot because due to the fact I was scrawny and I didn't have upper body strength, he was trying to take me over to the gym and do exercises and stuff to help me build up my upper body so I could hold the rifle in the standing position. So him and I became pretty good buddies. And I think he liked the fact that I didn't get turned off by the fact of his wounds and whatnot. And I don't know. He helped me a lot, and I remember him. And so Mike helped me get, into the rifle team, something I would not have done on my own. And so we did that for over a year, just traveled around. I worked with a lot of civilians at Aberdeen. Many of the instructors were civilians, civil servants. So already my military, and even at Redstone, a lot of civilians, civil servants. So my first period in the Army was like with all these engineers, civilians, and all that. And towards the end of my tour in Aberdeen, the Cheyenne helicopter was being developed by Lockheed in LA here. And they said, why don't they picked a couple of us, and you're going to go travel to Lockheed and, be the heads up guy on the armament systems that we would be teaching here at this school once the Cheyenne helicopter came in. It was the first attack helicopter that the military developed. Mm-hmm. Everything before then were add-ons, and that's what we were teaching was these miniguns, M60s, rocket launchers they tacked on to the Hueys. And then the avionics that went into the helicopter, we taught that also. So, but they canceled the program. We didn't get to come out to California. So I worked around a lot of civilians, engineers, early on in my military career. And so one day I was at the rifle range. I remember this specifically, this small bore range. And before that, me and one of the other guys wanted to go work in our MOS. So he had volunteered to go to Germany. So he went over to personnel and volunteered, and they said, no, you can't go to Germany. We need you here. And then we said, well, what about Vietnam? They had Hawk missiles in Vietnam from 65, 66 time frame to 69, and then they started pulling them out in 69. And the Marine Corps had a battery of Hawk missiles at Da Nang. So that was kind of the Hawk presence in Vietnam. You had Hawks in Korea, Okinawa, Germany, and of course the Hawk missile became famous during the Cuban Missile Crisis when they had them in Florida. And President Kennedy would drive by. There's a lot of those pictures of Kennedy driving by, and the Hawk missiles were sitting out there. So me and John wanted to get back into our job and stuff. So we volunteered to go to Vietnam, and this is when I first learned, now, you can't go to Vietnam. Why? Well, they're pulling them out. They go, oh, okay, all right. So at the end of 68, early 69, personnel called us up and said, you're going over to Korea. Oh, okay. So went on leave, went to Korea, flew out of Seattle, SeaTac, to Anchorage, to Yokota in Japan, and into Seoul. And transferred into the 30th Ordnance Guided Missile General Support Unit, which was it wasn't in downtown Seoul, it was over by the Han River. It was Nimmelwerks, an area that was there since the Korean War. And that's where our unit was. And the unit consisted of, general support at this time in the Army was the highest level of support maintenance for anything, trucks, missiles, airplanes, helicopters, whatever. So we were the last place that things would come to get fixed. If we couldn't fix it, it went back to the United States. So that's kind of the level of support we do. And then you had support at the batteries, the Hawk missile batteries. And those were outside of Seoul, and they were up along the DMZ. So our company did general support for Hawk missiles, Nike Hercules missiles, Pershing missiles, and the handheld Red-Eye missile, which would be the precursor to the Stinger missile, which has been in the news a lot. So we did all that repair work. And and then they had a program that for the Hawk missile only. That's the reason why we got pulled into Korea from our jobs in Maryland. I probably would have, if it wasn't for this, we probably would have stayed in Maryland.
And that was a maximum security area, wasn't it?
Right, yeah, oh yeah. We had 2 maximum security areas that we worked at. So what they were doing, here I am. Looking through my records for this, I discovered that the guy that was in charge of the program we were working on was a civil servant. I didn't remember that. And he's the one that signed some paperwork. And so we worked on that, and we were working, what they were doing is upgrading the missiles. They were putting the latest upgrades into them. They were pulling them out of all the batteries and cycling them through us, and we were putting these upgrades in them and getting them to tip-top shape, because the missiles, we had a few missiles come in from Vietnam. We called them the Vietnam birds, and we would work those, but most of those went back to the States. So we were just working. We worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and we did that until I left Korea, working on this upgrade and bringing the missiles to, because they found in Vietnam that the missiles had some problems. Yeah, a lot of them with moisture and stuff like that. So one of the things we were doing was we take them apart, inspect them, fix them if necessary, upgrade them, and then put them all back together. And we had a new purging procedure, so when we put the skins back on them and all that, they could handle the moisture better and rain and stuff like that.
And so you had to keep your rifle with you at all times.
Oh, yeah. Korea. Stop. This is 1969. Korea had a big buildup in 67, 68, and 69. And that was because when the United States went into, I learned this after the fact, when the United States went into Vietnam, Korea started escalating. A lot of people are not aware of that. So in 1966 to 69 was a period called the Second Korean War, or the DMZ War. So when the Tet Offensive began in February of 68, was also the same month that the North Koreans captured the Pueblo. And so Korea was going crazy. People were getting killed on the DMZ, not in great numbers. More of the Korean military were dying on the DMZ than the Army. I think we lost maybe over that period a couple hundred people in the U.S. military, and the Koreans, of course, much more. Yeah, South Koreans, that is. Mm-hmm. So there was activity going on, little skirmishes up on the DMZ. I don't know how much, I don't think it really got into the press in the United States, but it lasted for 3 years. And it was called DMZ War. And so we were brought in to get the missiles brought up to par for this potential war that may be getting ready to go on. So when I was in Korea, the year that I was in there, I wasn't in there a year, but we had 4 guys killed in a Jeep up on the DMZ. It actually happened right before I left. And then there was a EC-121 reconnaissance airplane that was on the old Connie, 4 propellers, that was shot down over the China Sea, and 31 people were killed in that incident. So you had all these little incidents going on, and of course I wasn't involved in it. The guys that went up to the DMZ, they were getting combat pay. They were able to get awarded the combat infantry badge. The medical guys got combat medical badges. So it was kind of like, there was I forget the name of the river, but once you passed that river, you were in an actual combat zone at the time. So a couple of our batteries were in that area. So, you know. But I didn't know anybody that was hurt or injured, my time in there. But it was happening. It wasn't to the intensity level as Vietnam or anything. So we would work up there, come back. But one of the jobs I had was, once we got all these missiles upgraded and put together, we had to put them into storage. And so that was one of the jobs I had, was what we put them together. We'd take the warheads, the rocket motors, the guidance section, and we'd put them together. And we did this in a place called Daegu, which was about halfway down the Korean peninsula. And it was at the 833rd Ordnance Area, Maximum Security Area. It had double barbed wire fences, machine gun nests, dogs, Jeeps with 50 cows and machine guns on it. It was a very secured area. You had to have special permission to even get into it, which of course I had. And so we worked in there. And this is where I worked alone a lot. Most of my time in Korea, I worked by myself, believe it or not, either fixing stuff or putting these missiles into a can. Well, I really wasn't alone. We had ammunition guys that did all the heavy work, putting the missiles together, putting them in their cans, purging the cans, and then they put them in the bunkers. And they operated forklifts. And what I did is I ran the test on them, system tests. So I would hook them up, hydraulics, and run this bunch of tests that we did on this big piece of test equipment we had. And then we'd just keep doing that process and putting them in the storage. Also worked with the Nike guys a little bit, because that's where our Nike platoon was at the 833rd Ordnance and Maximum Security, MSA as we call it. And so worked with those guys a little bit, so it was Nike and Hawk.
So altogether, how much time were you in that Korea
I think it
area.
was 7 months or something. Yeah, it wasn't there a full year. So we were just pulled out of Maryland and sent over there, a couple of us. And so the other guy that I went with to Korea, he went to one of the batteries at the 38 ADA, Air Defense Artillery Unit. And that was actually under the command of the Air Force at the time. I learned this after the fact. I wasn't aware of that. But so they did all the battery stuff up on the DMZ and around Seoul.
Did you get any R&R?
No, no R&R at all. We worked literally 6 days a week. Oh, another thing that happened. Okay, most of the guys just worked an 8-hour day. If you were in Pershing or one of the other platoons, it was just like, an 8-hour day, 5 days a week, and that was it. But we were working 6-7 days a week and 12 hours. So we had a lot of support people that helped us out, like the generators. Everything we had to be run off generators. You didn't plug it into the wall. So we had generator guys that took care of the generators, but they didn't want to work, on the weekends. They didn't want to, be getting up, and supporting us in the night, because we worked 2 shifts doing this job. And so I got upset with the generator guy one day, and I said, well, you need to be over here to turn these generators on so that we can work. Because if we don't have power, we're not working. And so he said, well, do you want to learn how to do it? And I said, yeah. So he gave me a whole complete how to turn them on, check out, this and that, make sure that, it was operating correctly, and do some minor repairs if needed. So I become kind of a generator guy. And then when we went down to the MSA and I worked down there, we had a generator. And guess what? I ran the generator too. So I'd come in, turn the generator on, and go about my work. So we did a lot of that, and you'll see in our letters over there that what they really were amazed about us was that we could work on our own with little or no supervision. I think it's the terminology that they did. So the people that were doing this maintenance program, we had civil servants with us. We had the Raytheon field engineering group with us. So there was a group of us that were there, upgrading these Hawk missiles. And but we just basically worked on our own. It was a different military. I mean, most people in the military are not doing this. We were in a different kind of, I don't know how to explain it.
While you were there, were you able to have regular contact with family back home?
No. It was, other than letters. Yeah. And we'd get the care packages from, somebody would get a care package in, and then of course that was fun. We always enjoyed that. The letters, I have to admit that. I always liked getting a letter. But yeah, it was just basically work. 12 hours a day, sleep, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And did that for the whole time.
Was that your last duty station then? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Then a couple times during when I was in the service, you go to these like re-up talks, and hey, how would you like to join? But see, I had this MOS that was like at the top of the list. So, but there was a school, and it was a joint school with Air Force, Navy, Army, and it was the nuclear school. And I really wanted to get into that school because it was the next level, and it was like a 3-year school, if I could be incorrect. And I really wanted to do that. And you learned about weapons, you learned about power plants and anything nuclear, and it was a great school. But again, I couldn't get into it. And the last time I went through this discussion, he said, well, you could go to OCS. And I said, well, I didn't really want to do that. and he said, we can pay for your college education. And I almost took him up on that one. And he said, you can go to any school, you know, and I said, I want to be an engineer. And so but I didn't. At the end of the day, I didn't do it. So, but my whole Army career was spent in a different way than most people that were in the military. I worked around many professionals, engineers, civilians, on all this. And so it was kind of different. We flew in Chinooks all over Korea. So we'd go from Seoul down to Daegu, halfway down the peninsula, and we'd go back and forth. Some of my duty there was to courier classified stuff. When I went into the service, I got a secret security clearance because of the Hawk missile. So pretty much everybody in our platoon had a security clearance. So one of the duties we do is when we would move classified items, either paperwork or missile components and stuff, we had to do couriering duty. So we would be armed and all that. And so we would go from one back and forth all the time. We did that basically in Chinooks. And so I had 3 incidents in Chinooks. We got buzzed down flying back up to Seoul one time by the Korean Air Force. And we ended up on a road.
Oh, dear.
He auto-rotated it. I was asleep, which I did a lot, sitting there up against a little porthole, and then all I remember was my stomach coming up, and woke up and then saw the ground, and finally he auto-rotated it down. Everything's fine. And then another incident, we were just flying along, I don't know what happened, and then he auto-rotated it. That one we didn't land. He was able to recover it. And then we were at Busan one time, and I was again going back and forth, and we had a hydraulic leak, and the crew chief on the helicopter was trying to fix it. So we got off of it, and he would hover it up and muck around back there, and then lower it back, up and down, up and down. We did that for a while, and he said, okay, we're good to go, and we all climbed aboard. You know, you're only 20 years old. And so we got up, he started bringing that helicopter up, and then just suddenly it was like it was on fire. And just missed all this. And that hydraulic leak he was trying to fix, he didn't fix. And we went, come back down on the ground. It was quite hard. And just this fog and mist. It was the hydraulic fluid. I worked around hydraulic for part of my job was launchers, and they had a lot of hydraulics in it, so I understood 3,000 psi can be very dangerous. And many years later, I had a technician I was working with as an engineer on Sparrow missiles instead of Hawk, same type of missile but air to air, and we had a hydraulic leak, and he was trying to find it, and he was moving around on the surface of the missile trying to find that leak, and it took the end of his finger off, just a little bit. So that stuff can be very hazardous to you. So we had this fog going on in there. We all kind of ran off the helicopter and everything, and had hydraulic fluid dripping off of us.
Oh, dear.
So those are the big events of my career. So I have been in helicopter crashes.
Yes, you have. Oh, goodness.
But Chinooks, that was the only one. Even though the systems we worked on, I was teaching, were for Hueys and stuff, I never was in a Huey, other than the mock-ups we had at Aberdeen. Because we had like these shells of the Hueys so that guys can learn, you know, how to operate that stuff and fix it and do all that. So, helicopters. So,
So what was the highlight of your service for you, good or bad?
yeah, it was all good for me. I would say I was probably timid, a little on the shy side before I went in. I know my brother, when I got back out, he says, wow, you've changed. Everybody said that to me. Different person. The military will give you confidence right off the bat. You know, it just does. They require you to push your limits. So that was number one. You can get excellent training. I knew a lot of people that got excellent schooling out of the military. I got electronics school, and the main thing I wanted to do was just go become an electronic tech. And after I got out of the service. So I had that. It did all that. It accomplished that. So I highly recommend people going into the military, especially young people that don't have a direction in their life. It will give you your confidence. It can get you some good training. I knew guys that were, they were mechanics on jets, A&Ps. They fix the jets, do all that. You get that training in the military. That's kind of what my dad had in World War II on B-17s and B-29s and stuff. He was a flight engineer, so he was responsible for fixing the airplanes.
So it's in your blood.
Yeah. So the military has really, really positive things if you can just kind of think through it. And I encourage people to, join, if that part of that conversation ever comes up around people. So I would highly recommend it. I know people in 1966, early 66, 65, many of the people that I went to high school with in Ojai joined the Marine Corps. And that was a 4-year commitment at that time. That was like joining the Air Force or joining the Navy. When I joined the Army, it was just a 3-year commitment. So, and your total commitment at that time, I don't know if it's still this way, was 6 years. So I did 3 years of active duty and then 3 years of inactive reserves. But the people that were drafted they did 2 years active, 2 years weekend warriors, and then 2 years of inactive. So when they got out of the service after 2 years, they still were in the service, in the reserve components. So I knew people that joined the Marines. Matter of fact, the first kid in my class of 66 in Ojai joined the Marines, and by the end of 66, we were in church, and a priest, Mike Seneca died in Vietnam. First kid in Ojai to be killed in Vietnam. He joined the Marines, did the training and all that, went to Vietnam. 3 months later, he was shot, killed in action. So, and there was 4 of us that joined, 4 people that I knew, went to high school with, that joined the Marines in 1966 that were killed in Vietnam.
Oh.
There were 6 people killed in Vietnam from Ojai. One was in the reserves. He was a helicopter pilot, was not killed in action. He was doing helicopter, I think diplomats from Australia or something, and crashed, and everybody died. And then there was another guy that was not killed in action. So of the 6, 4 were killed in action, 2 were accidental deaths, and 4 of them were Marines, and they all joined the Marine Corps. This is 1966. Then another high school buddy went to join the Marines, went to Vietnam, turned around and did a second tour in Vietnam. And I knew many people that did that, even in the Army. And then back in the early 70s, his buddy in Vietnam came out, him and his wife came out, and he owned a fishing boat, a pleasure boat, fishing boat, that they would go out to the islands, the Channel Islands, and go fishing. So they all went out, went fishing, were on the backside of the islands, and then came around, and it was storming, and they died.
Oh, no.
And it was in the news and everything. So poor, Yeah, that to me was a sad story. I mean, you did 2 tours in the Marine Corps, in Vietnam, and then drowns out here off the coast.
That is sad.
So these are some of the experiences. I don't really recall at this time in my life, in high school or after that, of knowing anybody that was drafted. I was thinking about this for a while. Everybody that I was close to joined the military, mostly in the Air Force or the Navy, and then, of course, some of these individuals, the Marine Corps. But me and my 3 buddies that joined that day, Nick joined with the 3 of us. He went to Fort Bliss and spent 3 years in Fort Bliss and got out.
Wow.
So most of the people I knew in the early days, 66, in that time frame before I went into service, joined the service. And Richard, one of the 3 of us, he went into the Signal Corps. He went to Fort Gordon. He went to Korea for a year. Came back, went to Fort Detrick in Maryland, where I was stationed at, Aberdeen, right next door. We did hung a little bit there, but not much. And then he went to Vietnam after that. And then I went to Korea right after he left. And he went to Vietnam, was in the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Infantry Division in Signal Corps, and basically just did signal work, didn't see any action, and came home. So I knew a lot of people that did that were in Vietnam. So Richard went to Vietnam and came home, and then my story is, similar. So we did that. I went into engineering, went to college, went to Cal Poly, got my engineering degree on the GI Bill. Another point about going into the military, they will pay for your college or help out on it. I made E5 in 22 months. So even for that era, that was pretty fast in getting rank. But I was a Spec 5, not a...
So go into your college and your work after, and don't forget Beverly. When you met Beverly, she needs to be mentioned in this.
So after my military service...
You discharged in 69, correct?
Yeah, November. December 66 to November 69, 3 years. I got home to Ojai, sat around the house for a little bit, and that January I was at Ventura College and did not stop for 4 years and got my degree in electrical engineering. And the GI Bill, paid for it. I think it was $126 a month or something at the time.
That was 1974.
Yeah, 1974 I graduated. And of course there were a lot of veterans at school at that time, naturally. And one of my closest friends up there was a guy that served as a combat soldier in Vietnam, had a Purple Heart, had a Bronze Star, and he was from Taiwan. And so we became buddies because we had a lot of classes together. And when we were at the end of our 4 years, he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, I got a job interview down in Oxnard, and that's where you're from." I go, yeah. His family was from Sacramento. He lived all his life up there in Sacramento area. And so they said, "Bring some other guys down, just give them a call." So I gave him a call, and so him and I came down to Oxnard and went for an interview at Raytheon Oxnard. Oh, here we go again. And I knew Raytheon people. I've worked with them over in Korea. And so we interviewed and everything, and they gave me a job offer. And In 1974, an electrical engineer, they offered me $1,000 a month for my first job, out of college, wet behind the ears as an engineer. At the time, the average wage was $1,074 a month. So that's kind of where I fit in the category. And then I went to work for Raytheon. And of course, at Raytheon, I was always introduced as, oh, this is the guy that worked on the missiles in the military. And so I got along with the technicians because I was a technician and I wasn't that engineer. And so I did that. I worked at that time on the Sparrow missile, working for upgrades, doing that. And that is the air-to-air version of the Hawk missile. So they flew them on the Phantoms, the F-14s and all that. So I worked on that project, doing upgrades. We took it from tubes to microprocessors. Those were the upgrades that we did to the Sparrow missile. And then I started working on AMRAAM, which was the state-of-the-art air-to-air missile that all the airplanes used it in the 80s and in the 90s, still using it. And so I did that. Then I went to Northrop Company in the mid-80s and started working on cruise missiles. And yeah, I worked on cruise missiles. Can't go any further than that. So actually one of them is when the wall fell in 1990, a couple of the programs I worked on were canceled, along with a lot of other programs that were canceled. And one of those cruise missiles is now used by the Polish military in Ukraine right now.
Oh, wow.
So it canceled us. Lockheed picked up the program and developed. That's kind of common in the aerospace industry, and now it is in Ukraine in the modern context. The Hawk missile last November, Spain. There's still a number of countries using the Hawk missile. Singapore, Spain, Sweden, I think Kuwait still uses it. The Spanish have sent 4 launchers with everything to the Ukraine. So the Hawk missile may be seen in action again in the modern era. So kind of keeping an eye on that. So I worked on the cruise missiles, traveled all around, worked at many military bases, worked at Edwards on B-52s. I designed the launch control system for these things. I'd be out there on the flight line under a B-52 in the hot desert sun. So my military career just kind of segued right into my career, which I retired in. After that, I went to the base at Point Mugu. After the wall fell, I worked on the F-14 and programs for the F-14. And then the F-14 kind of went away, and then I got into maybe 15 years working in electronic warfare and supported the guys in Iraq. We did a lot of work supporting the guys in Iraq, especially with the IEDs, with the jamming. So we helped mitigate some of those problems for the guys that were dealing with IEDs. There was a good show on the Smithsonian Channel about some of that, on electronic warfare, so look at it. And because it gives you that history, So I worked on electronic warfare until I retired. And a transition, it was the EA-6B, which was an A-6, a medium Navy bomber that was converted to a jamming platform, and then we moved it to the F-18, the Growler program. And now that is being used. The Australians are using it because of China. Until I retired, I was doing nothing really different than I did when I was in the Army, believe it or not. So that's what the Army did for me. It allowed me to get my college education, and I just worked my whole life doing something similar to what I experienced in the military. Worked with veterans. I worked with a close friend of mine on the EW program who was a Gulf War veteran. He was in the Marines. He was a tank commander. He did all that tank stuff that you've seen. And he went to Georgia Tech, become an electrical engineer, and him and I worked together on the electronic warfare programs. And then finally he transitioned. He was civil servant, and he transitioned to Washington, D.C. That's what they kind of do in civil service. You go to Washington, D.C., and he worked with the NSA. So you can see these veterans. That's what veterans do, a lot of them, is they just continue on into business. And so I'm happy I did it. I enjoyed it. I'm happy I did it, and it worked out for me.
Yeah. And you met your wife while you were working at Raytheon.
Yes.
Look at that.
Yeah.
She was there too.
Yeah. And she worked in the business all her life. So we both, she was a mechanical engineer, did a lot of drafting, wiring in the airplanes. When we'd upgrade, say like the F-14, the wiring bundles had to be modified and all that. And she did a lot of that, the schematic diagrams for that. She did, for me, her and I worked together closely for a little while there. When I was doing printed circuit card design, she did the printed circuit cards. I did all the electrical, the components, the ICs and all that, and then she laid out the boards. That's a complicated process. You know, they were multi-layer boards, so it was even more tougher. And so she worked in the business also.
You were a good team.
Yeah, yeah. She worked B-2, F-14. She did a lot of work on the F-14. So then we retired and done well. And I highly recommend this route.
Yes, you have. Well, your advice to those watching, I think, bears repeating, because it was wonderful that joining the military could be a great opportunity.
And I didn't experience a lot of the things you make for the Vietnam guys there. I didn't experience that. I traveled more than, say, most soldiers at the time because of, the jobs I had. I was on airlines frequently, flying standby, always in uniform. When I first went into the service at Fort Polk, Louisiana, I went on December 1st. Went to reception center, which was a week long, and then started basic training. And then for some reason, I don't remember why, they said, you can go home, go on leave. We're like 2 weeks into basic training. So none of us had any money, or a lot of us didn't have any money. And so, how do we get home? Because you had to pay your way home. And they said, well, get a military flight, go up to Shreveport, Louisiana, go to the Air Force, Bardsdale, and get a flight, back to the West Coast. Oh, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. So a number of us went up to Shreveport, went to the air base, talked to everybody, and they said, oh yeah, there's a bunch of Marine Corps Chinooks right off the bat, haven't been in the service more than a couple weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm in a Chinook. And they said, oh yeah, we'll take you to El Toro, but it's going to take a while. All right, so we went into town, said just be here, tomorrow morning. So we went into town and we walked into a bar in downtown Shreveport in uniform, and it was like walking into Hollywood cowboy movies. The bar just went silent. Uh-oh, what did we do here? And they looked at us, and I can remember this one guy sitting at the bar. He says, come on over here, boys. Let me buy you a drink. And they fed us, bought us alcohol, got us back to the air base so that we can get back. And that was a lot of my experiences in the military. Friends of mine go to their families' homes in like Staten Island, New Jersey, Parsippany. In Georgia, I went to a number of barbecues at friends, and everybody would come over, and So it was a different experience.
community.
And I think a lot of people experienced that. I ran across a high school buddy in Maryland, and his uncle worked for Sperry Rand in Washington D.C. and we were down there at their house having a good time, and he was a pilot. He had a twin-engine little prop plane, and he flew us from Washington over to Annapolis. He had to go to work for some reason. We went up to the building at Sperry, and then he took us out to lunch, and, you know, then back we come. So I had a lot of experiences in that, you know, arena, you know, where they were pleasant. It wasn't like, you know, people throwing stuff at you or anything.
So you didn't experience any of that?
No, I did not, and I was in uniform a lot because I traveled a lot more, you know, leaves and back and forth between assignments and stuff. So it wasn't like, I did not have that. Not to say it didn't happen, I just didn't experience it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's good.
So
That's good.
the only time I experienced anything remotely tied to that type of behavior was many years later, in the late 80s, we went to a birthday party, and we were introduced. This was when Top Gun 1 was a popular movie, and we were introduced as the people that worked on the F-14, which at that time I had no connection with the F-14. And many of the people were the anti-war crowd and stuff, and they kind of, they didn't want to talk to us and stuff. That was the closest and that was many years after the fact, 20 years or so. And that was also when the B-2 was coming out. And so there were a couple people at this party that were really interested in that B-2, and they were asking us questions about it. Oh, you were in Northrop, oh, the B-2, you know, because it was in the news a lot and everything. And so I just only worked on the parachute sequence, and that was it, nothing more. Nothing dramatic, nothing Hollywood.
But they're very interesting.
You're right,
Very
Yes,
interesting.
all very interesting,
Yeah.
very.
Wow, you've had quite a lifetime there, but
Yeah.
Yes, you have.
And I enjoyed every minute of it. I mean, it would be stressful. You know, those 12-hour days in Korea, there were times, especially during Iraq. We were working long hours, and then the modern world is different than it was back during the Vietnam or even before, is we do a lot of things online now. Communicating, satellite communications, all these things. So sometimes you can be here at 3 in the morning dealing with something going on overseas in real time almost. Well, you know, you get that little latency in there, but other than that, so it's totally a different, you know, world. You know.
Yeah, that's true, that's
It's,
true.
yeah.
the communication.
And you guys made it possible.
Yes,
we did.
yes, you
We were-
did.
yeah.
You were protecting all of us.
All right, well, that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much
Nuts.
for your service, Sandy. It's been a pleasure.
I'm more than happy.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal.
Right.
That was awarded to the guys in Korea from 66 to 72 like that. A new ribbon, I haven't completed at St. Louis, but Korean Service Medal.
Okay.
The Korean that was kind of like our officer.
Okay. Good.
Pershing missile guidance sections. And like I said, I traveled a lot, and down at there, I always had my M14 with me. Tube out of a Hawk missile. They had the little mini tubes in them. This Veterans Day.
Oh, okay. Let me get a little closer on some of these images.
He had a sense of humor in our taxi.
Right, there's your taxi. Cool. There's that Hawk.
There is the entrance
good.
to our compound with the missiles, that we supported.
Good. Okay.
Gives you the 8th, the 30th Order and the battalion.
All right.
It was,
And there's the famous Chinooks.
all the stuff around.
All the stuff around.
That was down at Tegu. A lot of bombs and stuff coming in and out of there.
Yeah.
Ordnance, missiles, special weapons.